So our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is from the world of business, one of the greatest entrepreneurs in this country. He knows about risk, he knows about the challenges of employment, of revenues, of profits and losses. He runs an incredible family business, an international business, all over the world. So he knows a thing or two about global trade. Not only is he an incredibly successful entrepreneur, but he's an incredibly generous philanthropist, in particular to the world of education. And quite rightly, he was knighted for his services to tourism. Before we welcome Sir Rocco Forte to the stage, let's just hear him in action recently about Brexit.
You supported Brexit. What do you make of Mrs May's deal?
Well, it's sort of locking yourself in jail, giving the European Union the key, and then saying to them, you decide when we come out and on what terms. It's a complete disaster and completely unnecessary.
How confident are you that London continues as that flagship location?
London has everything. It has a combination of the business side and the culture. Because I understand how difficult it is to do business in Europe. In relation to the rest of the world, Europe is not competitive.
Please welcome to the stage
Sir Rocco Forte.
Good evening. I wouldn't be here today making this speech, and neither would Tim, if we followed the example of businessmen and women who are reluctant to speak out in favor of Brexit. They would argue he and I ought not to speak our mind because it will alienate a proportion of our customers who might not agree with us. Certainly not you. But I believe that at a time when the country needs clear information from those who do run businesses, that people like us must speak out about the potential benefits and huge opportunities in this monumental change we're standing on the threshold of. Because while Corbyn calls this a crisis, I call it a turning point. A turning point with benefits that are potentially so great it would be irresponsible not to point them out. We would seem to be moving to a no-deal Brexit, by which I mean WTO-based Brexit. With the defeat of Mrs May's proposed withdrawal agreement in Parliament, a deal that pleased nobody, there's an opportunity to move to something far, far better. There's been a long campaign to present a no-deal Brexit as a terrifying scenario where all hell will be let loose and our economy and job prospects will be devastated and where we will all be a lot much poorer. As that piece of paper carefully posed to stick out of the minister's folder said, "No food, no Channel Tunnel." This tells you everything you need to know about how far the government is prepared to go to scare people into giving up on what they voted for. How patronizing to think that British people will believe a line like that. And now we hear the Chancellor, Philip Hallam, he seems to have his own private policy on Brexit. In the thrall to the vested interests of big business, privately told executives in a conference call yesterday that has been leaked that ministers are planning to stop a no-deal Brexit, even if it means rescinding the triggering of Article 50, reversing the Brexit process entirely. If this is true, the government is creating panic where there does not need to be panic and caving into the scare stories to potentially utterly betray the British people. I don't believe at all the scare stories to be true. And if you look at it in a rational way, they can't be. I believe a far bigger risk for our country is to stay in the EU. Remainers have never been able to sell the merits of the EU and the European project because it's unappealing to the British electorate who can smell a rat a mile off. So they have restricted themselves to talking about reforming it from within. This is a fantasy story, as unrealistic as they claimed they were setting out to reform, as if one claimed one was setting out to reform the mafia from within. The reality is that three extremely Europhile prime ministers, Major, Blair, and Cameron, all passionate about the EU and well in with its leaders, never managed to wring a single concession out of it. So, with nothing to say of any real substance about their hopes for the future of the EU, the Remain camp have reverted to scaremongering about the damage that would be done if we left. This is the main thrust of the Remain campaign as the country moved towards a leave vote, and this is what is happening today as the country moves towards a no-deal Brexit. They were completely wrong the first time round. They are completely wrong again today. From what is being suggested by them, you would surmise that the whole British economy is dependent on Europe. This isn't the case at all. Only 5% of GDP is represented by trade of goods crossing borders, and 12% of GDP if one allows for services in which there is no free market, of course. 94% of businesses, which make up the bulk of the UK economy and employment, are not involved in trading with Europe. So where is this Armageddon going to come from? All the cliff edge and the crashing out bears no resemblance to reality. Trade with Europe or travel into Europe is not just going to stop when we depart from the EU. A wall isn't going to go up between ourselves and other European countries. They will continue to export to us as we will continue to export to them, but under different rules. 55% of our trade is carried out with countries outside of the EU, including the US, which is the biggest single other country we trade with. We do this under WTO rules. There are no problems for our exporters. There are no queues of lorries at our ports of entry with goods coming in. There's little physical checking done at borders. Only 1% of incoming goods are checked. And much of the just-in-time manufacturing you hear so much about in the UK uses components coming from outside the EU with no problems at all. Many countries trade successfully with the EU on WTO terms. The US and China sell more into the EU than we do, and our trade with the rest of the world on WTO terms has grown faster than our trade with the EU, despite the free market, over the last 5 years. Tariffs, of course, will be levied on British goods exported to Europe, but these amount to about £5 to £6 billion, less than half of our current net contribution to the EU. Exporters have the benefit, of course, of the 15% devaluation of sterling since the Brexit vote, which will more than compensate for the tariff increases. Leaving to trade on WTO rules means we are immediately free of EU control. We get to keep our 39 billion, the cost of the withdrawal deal, which we can use to revitalize those parts of our economy which need it most. We can immediately set about negotiating free trade deals with other countries and reignite our trading ties with the Commonwealth. We will also be free to set our external tariffs in ways which benefit our own economy. We will be able to lower tariffs for the benefit of our consumers on imported goods that we do not produce ourselves. It is suggested our economy, the fifth largest in the world, is far too small to secure free trade deals on advantageous terms. And even if we do it, it will take a long time. What nonsense. Australia, a much smaller economy than ours, recently successfully negotiated deals with China, South Korea, and Japan inside 18 months. Iceland, a tiny economy, has a trade deal with China. It is the EU that takes forever to negotiate trade deals, as it has to take account the needs of 27 different countries, a very laborious process. This is not mentioned by the Remain camp, but part of a great pessimistic consensus of the great and the good. You might almost call it the pessimistic tendency. I've not known such a sense of defeatism and such a shameful lack of belief in the British people by the ruling class of this country since the 70s. It is almost treasonable how little belief the elite have in the innate brilliance, resilience, and ability to thrive of the British people. And that's where Brexit as an opportunity comes in. In the 70s, Mrs. Thatcher dragged us out of our torpor and enabled us to see the light, to become competitive, a force for good in the world once again. Today, there's no Mrs. Thatcher to give us back our edge, but there is this turning point of our leaving the EU. We can unshackle ourselves from a system which is clearly not working. When we joined the common market, it represented 35% of world trade, of the world economy. Now the EU represents 15% and is shrinking. The world economy is expanding at a much faster rate than the EU and will continue to do so. Why? Why should we restrict ourselves to such a small share of the world's trade with all the bureaucracy, control, and subservience it entails? When we can can become members of NAFTA and the Trans-Pacific Partnership. As a hotelier,
Sit down, sit down. We respect democracy, don't we? We respect the right of free speech and we expect them to do the same. Carry on, Rocco.
As a hotelier who operates in the UK, Europe and other parts of the world, I can categorically say that it is much more difficult to do business in Europe than it is in the UK. The EU's high corporate taxes, complex labour and legal system make Britain's low taxes and fair laws very appealing. Let's face it, the European economy has not been a success. Since the financial crisis, it has grown much more slowly than our own, and a number of European countries have not yet returned to their pre-crisis GDP levels. It has very high levels of unemployment, with frightening levels of youth unemployment. We stand on the threshold of a unique opportunity to be free of all of that. Why on earth would you cling to all that failure when you can carve out your own success? If we let it, Brexit can be the catalyst to move this country forward again. Britain, as a powerhouse economy, a beacon of road tax and rural regulation in Europe, this is the exciting prospect that we stand on the threshold of. We mustn't let the doom mongers talk us out of it. We must tell the good news about this historic moment of opportunity, allowing the British people to grasp it and make it their own. Thank you.